Hello and welcome to another edition of Digital Dialogues from Maritime Gateway. Today we have a guest with us, Mr. Dhruv Kotak. Dhruv Kotak is the Managing Director of the Baxi Group of Companies, a 106-year-old diversified business conglomerate involved in maritime services, ports, shipping, logistics, and technology. Over the years, the group has grown to be a truly global organization, and it has spread over 55 countries with 63 offices in different cities in India and the world. A fourth generation entrepreneur, Dhruv joined the business at a very early age of 15 years and has worked his way up. A quick learner with an astute business sense, Dhruv has been pivotal for the group's expansion and the Baxi Group's keeping it ahead of its peers with innovative in the maritime and logistics market. He has been instrumental in making the Baxi Group a truly global organization and is also acknowledged as a thought leader on the Indian maritime domain. He has spearheaded the company's venture into the technology business and championed the consolidation of the group's operations. Dhruv is a keen sportsman. He plays tennis, golf, and cricket, and he is also an avid trekker. Thank you very much for accepting our invitation and joining this interview. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Mr. Ramaprasad, and always a pleasure to be here with you with Maritime Gateway. It's such a long and lovely association, so really happy to be here.
Thank you. So let me begin by asking you, few years ago, we have been, in our industry, we have been talking about a lot of challenges, whether it is unresponsive bureaucracy or whether it is poor infrastructure or inefficiency in our logistics networks. Being a large player, dominant player in the ports and maritime domain, what is your experience in the recent years in terms of ease of doing business or in terms of the attitude of the government? What has changed in the recent years, and what should change for better?
Well, I think, Mr. Ramaprasad, I find that last, if I were to look at the last maybe decade, we've seen a sea change, and that change has been very systematic. So I think step one, the first change that we started seeing was a push towards making sure that there was the right type of policy framework. So if you just look at what has happened over the last decade and then culminating towards the end of the previous decade, we saw a lot of policies in the form of the Major Ports Authority Act, which then led to a transformation in terms of tariffing, and a whole bunch of other bills which then became. I think we've seen that combined with a number of guidelines, a number of policies issued by both the major port, the Ministry of Port, Shipping and Waterways, but also other enabling programs, be it the formation of the Department of Logistics under the Ministry of Commerce, the National Logistics Policy, the Gati Shakti program. I think we're looking at a government framework which has made policy clear, PPP even more clear and refined, a national investment pipeline which creates visibility in terms of the opportunity set which is there and what needs to be focused on. And therefore, there is a lot of transparency, a lot of clarity, a lot of visibility in terms of policy, opportunity, and I would say the overall sort of working framework. So I think this has been, a huge transformation. Where today, really, if I were to look at the overall atmosphere environment, very conducive. I think then look at that systematically, that has led to a lot of enablement to the bureaucracy, where a lot of the bureaucrats, a lot of the officers within the government, very clear playing field in which I think they can carry out a lot of development. So I think again, that's been a huge plus. And I think the third one is that there's a combination of both state and intervention in certain places, but a lot of private, participation, private investment. Railway stations for privatization, good sheds for privatization, Gati Shakti terminals for privatization, rolling stock for privatization. So combined with a spend from the state, but also spend from the private sector. It actually never could have been better than where it is today. But I will say this is not something that's happened overnight. It's taken a decade to get here. And I think we really should now take full advantage of this very, very conducive environment that we find ourselves in. As Indian companies, maybe as international companies, I think this is a very, very, it is the opportune time to look at a growing market with a very, very conducive environment for, investing in business, both.
Are there any specific areas which you want still to be changed?
So I think, in terms of probably the asks, I think the asks would be 2 or 3. I think one ask which I have, Mr. Ramprasad, is that I think while a lot of policy improvement has happened on ground, what I mean by that is that ports, railways, roadways, there's been a lot of improvement, both in terms of policy as well as a lot of trust on that. And then you see it in the form of investment, creation of global level champions in India, companies like ourselves. But I think similarly, the same degree of policy advocacy, the kind of attention to the maritime space. When I say maritime, I mean ships, I mean in the water. I think that's still, we still have some way to go, and India needs that. If India needs to be a global champion, I think our fleets, our ships, our shipbuilding, our shipping champions, I think this is going to be very, very critical. You will need to create a equivalent world-class policy infrastructure to enable it. I think the second one maybe that I can say is that I think we really have to accelerate whatever is there within the major ports, for example, where the government is clearly wanting to exit away from operating ports or operating anything within the port, and they want to become more and more of a landlord. I think the intent is there with the act, but I would say we can still do a lot more, a lot faster, which means a lot of the activities that the ports today are still performing, be it operating of certain berths, be it certain services like towage and pilotage, whether it's energy generation with their ports, whether it's development of industrial infrastructure. PPP frameworks should be created, and private participation in these need to come in quickly, as we have seen in the port space. So I would say, keeping in mind both maritime, the first point that I raised, and the second point in terms of the speed and the scope of what all further private involvement can be created. I think these are 2 areas where I would say still there is a lot of expectation from us in the private sector for more speed, more attention.
Talked about a lot of investments and especially private investments. So maritime finance is a big challenge as far as I understand. And you also have been on a very expansion spree. What is the scenario? How is the maritime finance, which is directly linked with all these new investments coming in, expansions and all that?
So Mr. Ramprasad, I will probably connect you a little bit. As JM Baxi, we are largely in the infrastructure space. So most of our expansion is around infrastructure finance. And I must say the infrastructure finance availability in India is, especially for Indian companies with a good track record, is quite good. You have development finance agencies, you have international banks, you have Indian banks with phenomenal experience and expertise, both private sector and public banks. You have access to the bond markets. Now we're looking at the surety bond markets. We can even look at InvITs. So there is a lot of options for infrastructure companies. And I would say that market is quite well defined and quite robust. And now it's, I would say, quite mature as well. So, in that sense, when it comes to infrastructure, have very little today to turn around and tell you that it's not there, it's there, it's really refined, it's really mature. But coming back to your point on maritime, I think that's again an area where the depth is missing. We still have not enough depth in the maritime finance space. We need a lot more in that space. Banks don't have a deep, fully, again, there will be specific banks in India also who understand ship finance. But I would say as a whole, the banking community in India do not really understand the maritime business. They don't understand the longevity and the nature of that activity. And I would say, if you remember in the past, there was also talk that ships need to be given infrastructure status, and therefore even the financing needs to be viewed in that manner. So I think, while I'm sure there are exceptions in India, and I'm sure there are global entities that are lending to Indian ship owners, I still think there's a lot more that can be done in terms of creating more depth and more maturity and more awareness for the financial and banking communities as far as the maritime sector is concerned. I think we can also look at further regulations like we have in the case of Gift City, where it becomes easier for Indian companies to register themselves, raise foreign capital, move capital. And I think again it should, I think the last point probably is that the Indian tonnage and the Indian flag will always have to keep improving itself to make sure that it is as attractive as any other global flag of convenience, so that finance and investors both are finding it lucrative to finance Indian ships on Indian flag.
Indian government has set itself a huge target of reaching 10,000 million metric tons per annum by 2047, by when India turns 100. In your perspective, how is this target achievable? Is it a doable target? And where exactly JM Baxi is in this space in terms of expansion in this capacity?
I mean, to answer your question, that is a very aggressive target. And we're talking about 10 billion tons of port handling by 2047. So, Mr. Abhisar, just to put it into perspective, I know you've been always so kind to me, and you treated me always as a youngster. But just to put it into perspective, sir, in 2047, I will be close to 65 years old. So, I think you'll be looking at a 65-year-old Dhruv Kotak at that time. And you are asking me a question for when I am 65. And therefore, let me try my best to answer that. I do believe that that's possible. I do believe that both in terms of, first of all, from a demand perspective, I think with the size of the economy that India is likely to be, and the significant role it is expected to play in terms of global supply chains, as well as to meet its own consumption needs, I have no doubt we will need at least, if not 10 billion, but at least very, very close to 10 billion tons of port handling capacity. I think to look at that type of quantum leap, right? If you look at India's current port capacity, it is in the vicinity of about 2.5 to 3 billion tons. So from 3 billion tons, we need to get to 10 billion tons. And I think what that really means is a combination of augmentation of current capacities, which are those ports which are already existing in the more major minor port space, augmenting them, enhancing their capacities, removing bottlenecks, improving connectivity. And I think taking that existing, let us say 3 billion tons between major and minor ports to approximately 6 billion through debottlenecking, brownfield expansion, satellite expansions in the same port ecosystem, I think is possible. I think they're looking at adding in another 3 to 4 billion tons of capacity through new greenfield ports. And you're seeing a lot of development in Andhra Pradesh. You're seeing some development now in Maharashtra. You're seeing some further development in Gujarat. I think there are ports being planned in different states. And some of these will be mega ports as well. So I do believe that if, with a national blueprint, looking at where exactly these cargo flows and where this capacity is going to be needed, I think it's very important to plan brownfield expansion of existing ports, new greenfield ports right away because they take time to come up. And of course, along with that, connectivity projects, both in terms of pipeline, road, railway, is going to be very critical if we are going to reach this type of hefty target. I think if we just look at it today, I think JMRC's capacity is about 5% or maybe 4.5% of India's total capacity. We are more like, out of India's 3 billion, we are probably about 130 million ton capacity as JMRC. Now, if I were to just look at that, if we were to be at 4% of a 10 billion ton capacity, sir, I would need to be at least 400 million tons by then. So I think it's the same principle. We would need to keep enhancing, adding terminals, adding infrastructure at different ports, both major, minor, greenfield, brownfield. We will need to be active in terms of keeping or enhancing that just to maintain our share of where we are and what we currently do. And that would again just mean making sure that as I said, we are not the biggest port operator in the country, but we are a good mid-sized player. And even a good mid-sized player will need to therefore then look at having aspirations of having this size of capacity by 2047, which means we have to be busy and keeping on investing over the next 10-15 years at least to make sure that these aspirations of the country in terms of cargo handling are met.
Wonderful. Apart from being a very passionate investor and promoter in the maritime space, you are also chairman of the FICCI Transport and Logistics Committee. You have been very positive about Indian growth scenario in this space. And so where do you exactly see the opportunities in the next decade or so? Any specific areas for potential investment on the sea side or land side?
I think, I would probably put them in about 4 or 5 buckets. So obviously, Mr. Ramprasad being a port company, port management company, I still see a lot of potential in terms of ports and terminals and terminal management. It's still very much in India, as we ourselves said, right? As we keep growing and the size of the basket keeps increasing. I think port terminals, I think this remains very, very attractive. I don't think that's going anywhere in terms of development. I think the second one which remains very attractive is the entire inland piece, be it rail or road, be it ICD, CFSs, warehousing, distribution, be it by sea in terms of coastal shipping. But I think any form of multimodal logistics from ports into the inland and back remain very, very relevant, very significant, because as we keep growing as a country, you will look at more and more industrial clusters in the interiors of India, the consumption of the interiors of India. So again, it remains very, very relevant in the high growth area. I think the third probably bucket I would look at is industrialization, which is basically industrial parks and special economic zones around ports, but also around inland, inland rail assets, inland logistics assets, building industrial clusters around that. I think it's very significant today. I think India will need to play a role on the global stage as far as supply chain partner, being a reliable supply chain partner is concerned. And that also means we will have to build industrial parks and industrial cities in close proximity to logistics assets, connecting them to global supply chains. And we'll have to provide this, facilities to global companies. So this will be needed to be done, and I see a lot of growth in that. But obviously, of course, it needs a lot of government intervention and participation as well. But it's a high growth area, and it's needed. It's needed for India. It's needed for the world. The third and fourth, we see a lot of growth still when it comes to marine services. As we look at more and more ships, more and more ports, you also need more and more marine services, dredging, heritage, stowage, bunkering, ship agency, channeling, ship channeling, different services. They're very critical, because if you are dealing with such a growth, you will also have to provide these support services, because they are also an integral part of the overall cost. And you have to provide them at a world scale, world quality. Imagine if you're saying 10 billion tons. Now, what does that mean from a dredging point of view? What does that mean from a towage point of view? What does that mean from a ship call point of view? There are so many elements to it, right? So I think, I think we need to be holistic about growth. Growth can come from all these different areas. I think the last point in which I think Mr. Ramprasad and we are both, familiar with and we both passionate about is the digital area. I still feel that digitization in the logistics and transportation space in India, we have still not scratched the surface. There was a lot of thrust during the COVID period, a lot of importance given during the COVID period, but there's much more we can do, much more. And I think the potential for digitization, for 4PL logistics, for platforms, for automation, for IoT linked solutions. I think there's just still so much that can be done in our space. So I think these are the 5 pillars I would say really in terms of where I see a lot of growth coming from. I can go on, I'm sure there are many more ideas. As you know, I'm a big believer in the Indian space. I mean, I still think shipbuilding, ship repair are critical parts of marine services. They're extremely important. I believe passenger traffic and facilities on the waterfront for consumers and for people will remain very, very important. So, I think the maritime space is so large and so connected to the world that I think, I actually feel that we have just so many avenues of growth. When I look at it as an Indian and when I present it as the chair of PICI, all I can say is that, the opportunity set is unlimited. And there is space for so many players. I don't think there can be any dominant player in this space.
I agree. Amidst all this optimism, let me raise 2 concerns that I have. One is we have been very positive about the growth of cargo on the East Coast, which I still feel that it hasn't picked up the pace that we expected. The second thing is the coastal shipping, coastal movement of cargo still sluggish at that around 5-6%. So what is your take on these 2 aspects and what could be the challenges now and how do we overcome these?
I think, Mr. Ramprasad, sorry, you will find me very positive on these 2 also. So I'm actually a bit optimistic and I can explain to you why I think it's been sluggish. So I think East Coast was sluggish, East Coast and coastal were both sluggish for the same reasons. And the reason is that from 2020, when COVID hit and the container shipping market internationally took off, ships, containers, their availability became a challenge. And therefore, they found themselves not able to provide enough ships and containers for lower paying markets, which was the coastal trade, also the trade from the East Coast of India. So automatically you saw a dip or flattening of the growth of both coastal and the East Coast of India. Our terminal in Visakhapatnam is a prime example where we saw pretty flat, in fact, also during the COVID period, where we saw ships leaving services, manned calls, not enough containers available, no new services being created, no growth at all, in fact, deceleration. Last 6 months, as we have seen, the container markets globally have started to cool. And because they have cooled, there are more ships available, more containers available. And now you are seeing the East Coast of India. This year, when you will see the statistics, Mr. Ramprasad, the East Coast of India will grow by 20-25%. Specifically places like Vizag, specifically places like Chennai. So the entire eastern belt is now experiencing growth rates which are far more than the West Coast. Of course, because the base was low because of COVID, but you are seeing a return to normalcy and that growth starting again. I expect that the global container market will remain a little cooler. You will see more and more ships and tonnage coming in, more and more containers coming in, which basically means that there will be a great supply of ships needing to find markets where to employ and deploy these ships. The 2 most optimal markets, in my opinion, at the moment will remain the East Coast of India and the Bay of Bengal and the coastal trade of India. My forecast, Mr. Ramprasad, is that both these 2 trades will see not only growth in cargo, but growth in services, containers, and interest by shipping companies to start playing in this. Given a year, I think my optimism will prove correct, and we will have another digital conversation at that time where I can definitely share with you the good news of the growth rates in the East Coast ports and the East Coast trade has seen, as well as what the coastal trade will see. So I remain very optimistic of both these two trades. As long as there are more ships and more containers which are made accessible, you will start seeing that the modal shift on both the East Coast trades as well as on the coastal trades will start happening, because there is cargo, but there's not enough of ships, not enough of containers. The ecosystem has not become mature and broad enough to really lead to this modal shift, but it is underway, and I remain very, very optimistic.
Wonderful. I mean, the kind of optimism that you show, it really energizes the whole industry. Okay. Let me talk a little bit about technology and automation. We have seen a lot of digital initiatives coming, especially post-COVID. The adoption rate has been high, but mostly we have seen either digital platforms or documentation, automation and all that. You yourself is a passionate technology driver with the PCS 2.0, I think. But on the ports and terminal side, what is the automation that is expected in the near future? Because ultimately, to match the efficiency levels of global terminals, that inevitably you have to be automated, and future is changing. So can you talk a little bit about how the port automation is going to take place on the Indian landscape?
I think on the Indian landscape, and I can probably speak more about ourselves, but where we see maximum thrust, Mr. Ramprasad, is going to be on sensors, sensor-based technology, Internet of Things, linked to those sensors, and of course, the development and advocacy and the development and rollout of 5G networks in the country. A combination of sensors, IoT, 5G, and data networks operating on the edge, I think will lead to, first of all, a huge transformation in terms of the degree of automation. I think real-time feedback and real-time, decision-making tools, which will be now available to port operators. You will see the advent of automation through, even available to developing countries like India, which otherwise was only something which was there in the West. But here, because of the 5G networks, data on edge, a lot of the solutions that we will end up having, you can actually start seeing that result a lot quicker, a lot cheaper compared to the West in terms of automation. So I think we will have the same automation journey like fully automated terminals, but I think Indian companies will end up missing that more expensive cost curve for automation that the Western world and the developed countries have had to do. So I think we will see the same degree of automation. I think the next year and a half with, as I said, rollout of 5G networks. I'm waiting for that because I think then you will start seeing companies like JM Baxi boasting of homemade terminal operating systems that are completely automated and cost effective at the same time. So I think that's going to be one big transformation. Could be 12 months, could be 24 months. We are more dependent on really start of, on edge and 5G networks really across the board, but we're not very far away. We're already testing the sensors, we're already testing a lot of other applications that enable us to gather these different data. I think on the port side, probably one more area where I think is pretty impressive at the moment is going to be how we deal with big data, and to a certain degree, the artificial intelligence that we are seeing becoming more and more accessible, which again means that it will lead to a lot of processing automation. which again, otherwise would have been extremely expensive in the past. I think because of the wide scale availability of open source AI tools, I think a lot of processing work also can be automated today for port companies, for logistics companies. So again, these are the two big buckets where I see huge amount of not only automation, but we will jump the curve in terms of that automation, in terms of cost, in terms of speed, compared to the Western world and developed countries.
You have been on the dream run, almost bagging projects in every sphere of our industry. So, what are your short-term plans and long-term plans for the JM Baxi Group?
So, dream run, it's very sweet of you, sir. But I think, I think more than a dream run, sir, we all view it in JM Baxi as, our responsibility and our duty to build our infrastructure, in this country. You mentioned yourself, sir, that, we have to, as an economy, this is the target that we have set ourselves. So I think it's our responsibility to really build our infrastructure, which is world class, in the shortest possible time, to make sure that as a country, we keep rising up, the logistics indexes, the supply chains become more efficient. It becomes more and more of an attractive destination, attractive port destination. I think in the short run, the focus could of course be in terms of making sure that all the projects that we have secured, we want to make sure that they are on stream as soon as possible, fully developed and commissioned with enhanced capacities, enhanced infrastructure, even beyond whatever was the mandated what was the minimum baseline that was given to us. We want to make sure that we create world-class infrastructure and develop it and deliver it as soon as possible, make it operational and make it world-class. I think the focus again remains to make sure that we go deep in terms of solving. So it's not just about quantity or large network, but it's also about making sure that we provide a very comprehensive solution at every port, at every location, not only limiting it to terminal operations or port operations, but also making sure that we have the right type of marine services, the ships can turn around efficiently, make sure that the energy generated in our ports are green, make sure that we are compliant on the ESG metrics, make sure that our transportation networks by rail and road remain efficient, make sure that we have more and more distribution points within the country, be it ICDs or CFSs. So we have a lot of work to do to make sure that the end cost, be it for the importer or exporter, be it for the ship owner who is looking at providing services from India, be it even the government ports that were our counterparts and our landlords. I think everyone must feel that there is additional value and generation. We have to make sure that the income that ports earn go up. We have to make sure that our customers get the best turnaround and best tariffs. We have to make sure that the end users are able to connect to maximum markets at the most efficient cost in the most efficient time. If that means, Mr. Prasad, we need more terminals, if that means we need more inland depots, or we need more services, or more tugboats, or more, whatever we need, then we must do it. And we must find a way to do it. So I think that's the short-term and the long-term plan in terms of making sure that we continue being a efficient trade enabler in our country.
Dil mange more.
Dil mange more, sir.
On that note, Mr. Dhruv Kotak, as always, it has been a pleasure talking to you. The kind of enthusiasm, the passion, and the optimism that you display always on the business potential, growth potential of Indian maritime sector. Thank you very much for joining us and sharing your thoughts.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much, and nice connecting.